She didn't understand at first why the silence felt wrong. The mountain had been quiet before. Heavy snow did that. It pressed sound down into the trees, into the roof, into her chest. But this was different. This felt like something waiting. She stood in the doorway of the cabin with her hand still on the knob, the cold pushing through her sweater, and tried to slow her breathing. Her phone had no signal. It hadn't for days. That wasn't new. What was new was the truck at the bottom of the narrow road. Engine off. Lights off. Just sitting there. She told herself it could be anyone. A lost hiker. A ranger. A delivery that had taken the wrong turn. But her father never lost anything, and when he wanted something handled, he sent men who didn't ask questions. Her name wasn't supposed to exist up here, and yet they had found her. The first thing she noticed when she stepped out of the car was that the cold didn't feel clean. It felt aggressive, not sharp like the winters back home, where the air still smelled faintly of traffic and heated stone. This cold had weight. It pressed against her face, her throat, the thin space behind her eyes. It made breathing feel like work. She stood there for a second too long, keys still in her hand, staring at the cabin as if it might change its mind and become something else. It didn't. A squat wooden structure, darkened by age, half buried in snow. The roofline sagged slightly in the middle. The chimney rose out of one side, black against the pale sky. There was no porch light, no welcome. Just a narrow, shoveled path leading to the front door like someone had cleared it without caring who would use it. Her driver didn't get out. Of course he didn't. He stayed in the front seat of the SUV, engine still running, hands on the wheel, eyes forward. He hadn't spoken since the last gas station almost an hour ago, not even when the road narrowed into something that felt more like a private trail than a public route. She could still hear the tires idling on the packed snow, the soft churn of the engine. She wanted to slam the door harder than necessary, just to make him flinch. But she didn't. She shut it carefully. That was what she had been trained to do. Never show the wrong kind of emotion. Never let it spill where it could be used later. Her suitcase sat in the snow beside her, already damp along the bottom. It looked ridiculous. Black leather. Expensive, clean, like it belonged in an airport lounge. Not here. She stared at it and felt something hot and sour rise in her chest. Not anger. Not fear. Something closer to humiliation. The driver finally rolled down the window a few inches. Cold air slipped into the car, and she saw his jaw tighten as if it offended him. "You have the keys," he said. His voice was flat, professional, almost bored. She didn't answer. She wanted to ask him if he felt proud. If he would tell her father later that she'd walked into the snow without a coat heavy enough, without boots meant for this, dragging her polished luggage like a joke. Instead, she just nodded once. The window went back up. The SUV reversed slowly, tires crunching, then turned around with careful precision. It disappeared down the road without ever fully committing to leaving tracks deep enough to be remembered. And then she was alone. The silence came in immediately, filling the space the engine had occupied. It wasn't peaceful. It was thick, almost wet, like being underwater. She looked around, trying to find something familiar. There was nothing, only pine trees standing like they'd been posted there to watch her. Snow piled high against their trunks. The sky was pale, colorless, the kind of overcast that made it hard to tell what time it was. She took one step forward and her boots sank deeper than she expected. The snow gave way like a trap. Her heel disappeared. She swore under her breath, instinctively glancing around as if someone might have heard. The habit was automatic. She'd grown up in rooms where even silence had an audience. She dragged her foot free, then grabbed the suitcase handle and pulled. The wheels didn't move. They caught instantly. The suitcase tipped sideways, half buried. She stared at it, then at the cabin, then back at the suitcase. For a moment she couldn't move. Her mind kept offering the same useless thought. This isn't real. But it was. She bent down, grabbed the suitcase with both hands, and lifted it. It was heavier than she remembered. Heavier because she'd packed as if she might need to defend herself against boredom. Books, expensive skincare, a laptop, 3 coats she'd convinced herself were warm. None of them were made for this. Her fingers started to ache from the cold before she reached the door. The lock resisted at first. The key turned halfway and stuck. She felt panic flare quickly, irrationally, the way it always did when something small refused to cooperate, like the world was punishing her personally. She tried again, forcing it harder. The key turned with a sharp click. The door opened inward with a long groan, the hinges complaining like they hadn't been used in weeks. Cold air spilled out from inside, too. The cabin wasn't warmer. It was the same temperature as outside, only darker. She stepped in carefully. The smell hit her first. Old wood. Dust. Something faintly metallic, and underneath it, a stale scent, like a place that had been closed up too long, like damp clothing left in a drawer. She shut the door behind her, more for the sound than the warmth. The cabin had one main room, a small kitchen corner, a table with 2 chairs, a couch that looked like it had survived several decades of neglect. There was a fireplace against the far wall filled with ash. Above it, a mantel with nothing on it. No photos, no decorations. It wasn't rustic. It wasn't charming. It wasn't the kind of cabin wealthy people rented for weekend retreats. It was just a structure, a place meant to keep wind out. She set the suitcase down near the door. The sound of it hitting the wooden floor echoed louder than it should have. Her throat felt tight. She walked toward the window and wiped the glass with her sleeve. The outside blurred into pale white. Snow, trees, no neighbors, no road visible from this angle. She thought about the way her father had looked at her the last time she'd been in his office, not angry, not shouting. That would have been easier. He just stared at her like she was something that had become inconvenient. "You don't understand what you're threatening," he'd said. She remembered the calmness in his voice, the way he'd leaned back in his chair like he was settling in for a long conversation, and she'd said, "I understand exactly what I'm threatening." That was the problem. She finally said something he couldn't buy his way out of. She moved deeper into the cabin, her boots leaving wet patches on the floor. There was a door to the right, slightly open. She pushed it. A small bedroom, a narrow bed with a thin mattress and a blanket folded neatly at the foot. A dresser with empty drawers. No mirror. The bareness felt deliberate, like someone had stripped the place of anything that could be comforting. She stood there for a long moment, staring at the bed. Then she went back out to the main room. Her phone was still in her pocket. She pulled it out, checked it again, even though she already knew. No service. No Wi-Fi. Nothing. She turned it off. Not because it would say battery. She didn't know when she'd be able to charge it anyway. She turned it off because seeing the blank screen felt better than seeing no signal, like a quiet insult. Her fingers were shaking now, though she couldn't tell if it was cold or something else. She walked to the kitchen corner. The cabinets were wooden and scratched. She opened them. Canned goods. Beans. Soup. A bag of rice. Some pasta. A few jars of peanut butter. A small stack of bottled water. Not much, but enough to last longer than she wanted to think about. On the counter was a note, plain white paper, folded once. She stared at it for a second, then picked it up. The handwriting was blunt and utilitarian. Generator instructions inside the drawer. Firewood stacked behind cabin. Keep door latched at night. Do not go past the ridge trail in bad weather. If you need supplies, call the number below when you have service. A number was written underneath. No name. No signature. She read it twice. The line that stayed with her was the one about latching the door at night. Not locking. Latching, like the cabin was the kind of place where the door might open on its own if you didn't secure it, or like something might try to open it from the outside. She felt her skin tighten. She folded the note carefully and set it down again, like treating it gently might make it less threatening. She opened the drawer beneath the counter. There was a flashlight, batteries, a small toolkit, and a laminated instruction sheet for the generator. The sheet was stained with oil fingerprints. Someone had used it many times. She looked around again. There was no electricity, no hum of appliances, no light except what came through the windows, dull and gray. She didn't know what she'd expected. Maybe she'd expected her father to exile her with a little softness. A token reminder that he was still generous, even when punishing. But he hadn't sent her here to be comfortable. He'd sent her here to disappear. Her stomach tightened at the thought. She took off her coat and hung it over the back of a chair. The air inside was cold enough that it didn't feel like relief. Her hands moved automatically, unpacking, checking drawers, opening cabinets, creating the illusion of control. She found a box of matches, a few candles, a metal kettle. She stared at the fireplace again. There was wood stacked neatly beside it. Dry logs. Kindling. Someone had prepared it, which meant someone had been here recently. That should have made her feel safer. It didn't. She knelt in front of the fireplace, hands hovering over the wood like she was afraid to touch it. She had watched fires being lit in elegant living rooms her entire life. Staff had done it quietly in the background, the way staff did everything. She had never actually done it herself. She sat back on her heels and felt a slow wave of frustration. It was ridiculous. She was 30 years old. She had chaired meetings, signed contracts, handled millions of dollars. She had spoken to reporters without blinking. And she didn't know how to start a fire. She picked up a log anyway, then set it down again. Tried arranging kindling the way she'd seen it done. The movements felt clumsy, unconvincing. She struck a match. It flared brightly, startling her. For a second she just stared at the small flame like it was alive. Then she lowered it to the kindling. The flame caught weakly, then died. She struck another match, then another. The smell of sulfur filled the air. Finally the kindling took. A small flicker. A hesitant flame that crawled along the wood as if deciding whether it was worth the effort. She added a small log too soon. The flame smothered. Smoke rose instead. She coughed, eyes watering. Her throat burned. She leaned forward and blew gently, trying to coax it. The smoke thickened. Her eyes stung hard enough that tears started spilling before she could stop them. And that was the moment she realized she might actually be in trouble. Not dramatic trouble. Not the kind her father handled with lawyers and intimidation. Real trouble. The kind that didn't care who she was. She sat back, coughing into her sleeve, wiping her face quickly with the back of her hand like she could erase the evidence. The room smelled like failure. She heard a sound outside. It wasn't loud, just a crunch. Slow, heavy. Footsteps in snow. Her entire body went still. The cabin didn't have curtains. The windows were bare. Anyone outside could see straight in. She stood up too quickly, her knee knocking the fireplace grate with a sharp metallic clink. The sound felt like a mistake. She moved toward the window without thinking, staying low, heart pounding so hard it made her ears throb. Through the glass she saw a figure coming around the side of the cabin. A man. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving like he belonged here. He wore a dark jacket and heavy boots. A knit cap pulled low over his forehead. He wasn't rushing, but he wasn't hesitant either, like he'd walked this path 100 times. He stopped near the stacked firewood, bent down, picked up 2 logs easily like they weighed nothing. Then he looked up. His gaze went straight to the window. Straight to her. For a second, neither of them moved. She didn't wave. She didn't step back. She just stood there, frozen, feeling the strange humiliation of being caught in a place she didn't know how to survive in. He walked to the front door. There was a knock. Not aggressive, just firm. Her mouth felt dry. She glanced toward the kitchen corner instinctively, as if there might be something there to defend herself with. There wasn't. The knock came again. She moved toward the door slowly, trying to make her breathing quiet. When she opened it, cold air rushed in, stealing what little warmth the cabin had managed to hold. The man stood there holding the logs. Up close, she could see his face clearly. Wind-freddened skin, light stubble, eyes that looked tired in a way money couldn't fix. He didn't smile. He just looked past her shoulder, toward the smoky fireplace. "You're choking the flu?" he said. His voice was low, not rude, just factual. She stared at him, not answering. He nodded once, as if he'd expected silence. "Someone dropped you off this morning," he continued. "Black SUV." Her stomach tightened. "Yes," she managed. He shifted the logs in his arms. Snow fell off them in small clumps. They didn't tell you anything, did they? Her jaw clenched. No. He looked at her for a moment longer, then his eyes moved to her boots, the suitcase by the door, the thin coat draped over the chair. He didn't comment. But something in his expression changed slightly, like he'd already made a decision. I'm Cal, he said. I'm the one who keeps this place from falling apart. She didn't offer her name. She wasn't sure why. Habit, maybe, or instinct, or the quiet fear that names had power, and hers was the reason she was here. Cal waited. When she didn't respond, he just stepped forward slightly and lifted the logs. Move, he said. The word wasn't harsh, but it wasn't a request either. She stepped aside automatically. He entered the cabin like it was his, boots leaving snow on the floor, shoulders brushing the doorframe. He walked straight to the fireplace, crouched down, and reached inside without hesitation. He adjusted something she couldn't see. Then he leaned forward and looked up the chimney. Flues half closed, he muttered. He stood, walked to the side of the fireplace, and pulled a small metal lever she hadn't even noticed. Then he crouched again, rearranging the wood with quick, practiced movements. He added kindling in a way that made her earlier attempt look childish. He struck one match, held it steady, and the fire caught almost immediately. The flames rose clean and bright. He didn't even look impressed. It was just something that happened because he did it correctly. She stood near the table, arms crossed tightly, trying to ignore the fact that her eyes still burned from smoke. Cal stood up and wiped his hands on his jeans. There, he said. The room already felt different. Not warm yet, but less hostile. She hated how quickly relief settled into her body. Cal turned and looked at her again. Storm's coming tonight, he said. Not a small one. She swallowed. How do you know? He gave a slight shrug. You live up here long enough, you feel it before you see it. He glanced toward the window. You got food? Yes. Generator fuel? I don't know. He walked to the back of the cabin and opened a door she hadn't checked yet. Cold air blew in again. He disappeared for a second, then came back holding a red fuel can. He set it down beside the counter. Half full, he said. That'll get you through a couple days if you don't waste it. She watched him, trying to decide what he was. Not a threat. Not exactly. But he wasn't friendly either. There was no warmth in the way he spoke, only practicality, like he didn't have the energy to pretend. She realized she was studying him too openly and looked away. Cal leaned against the counter, arms folded now, gaze steady. You can't stay up here without learning a few things, he said. Her throat tightened again. I didn't choose to come here. He didn't react to that. Didn't argue. Didn't offer sympathy. Instead, he nodded once, like he'd heard that sentence before. No, he said. Most people don't. The fire crackled behind him. A steady sound, almost comforting. She hated that too. Cal's eyes moved to her face, and for the first time his expression softened slightly. Not kindness exactly. Something closer to recognition. You got a name? He asked. She hesitated, just long enough for him to notice. Then she said it. Evelyn. Cal repeated it quietly, as if testing whether it fit the cabin. Evelyn, he said. All right. He pushed off the counter and picked up his gloves. I'll come back tomorrow, he said, before the snow gets too deep. She didn't ask why. She didn't ask what he expected from her. She didn't ask if he worked for her father. She should have. But the questions felt dangerous. Cal paused at the door. And Evelyn, he added without turning fully around. She looked up. He glanced at her phone sitting on the table. Don't count on getting out of here fast if something goes wrong, he said. This mountain doesn't care who you are. Then he stepped outside, pulled the door shut behind him, and the cabin was quiet again. But it wasn't the same quiet as before. Now there was warmth growing in the fireplace, and the knowledge that she wasn't as alone as she thought, which somehow made her feel even more exposed. She stood there for a long time listening to the fire. Then she walked to the door and latched it, not because she believed it would protect her, but because the act of doing it made her feel slightly less helpless. Outside, The sky had started to darken, and the wind was picking up. The wind started before sunset. Not sudden, not violent, just a steady push against the walls like someone testing the structure with both hands. She could hear it moving through the trees, first a low sweep, then a hiss. The cabin answered with small noises. Wood settling. A faint rattle near the roofline. She sat at the table with the laminated generator instructions in front of her and read the same sentence 3 times without understanding it. Prime for 5 seconds before ignition. She looked at the red fuel can Cal had brought in, then toward the back door he'd used. Her chest felt tight again, but not the same as earlier. Less shock, more awareness. If the power went out completely, if the temperature dropped further, if the storm was as bad as he'd said it would be on her. No staff, no driver, no one quietly fixing things in the background. She stood up before she could talk herself out of it. The back door opened harder than she expected, wind catching it immediately. Snow skittered across the threshold and into the kitchen corner. The air outside had changed. It smelled sharper, like metal and pine crushed together. The generator sat in a small lean-to structure a few feet from the cabin, half covered, old but solid. She stepped toward it carefully, boots sinking again. The sky had deepened to a heavy gray blue. Her fingers felt clumsy as she unscrewed the fuel cap. She paused. The silence out here was thinner than inside. She could hear more the trees bending, snow shifting from branches, something cracking in the distance. Her mind did something it had been trained to do since childhood. It ran scenarios. If someone wanted her frightened, this was effective. If someone wanted her cut off, this was efficient. If her father believed she would break after a few weeks, he might be right. The thought made her jaw tighten. She poured the fuel slowly, trying not to spill. The smell was strong, unpleasant. It clung to her hands immediately. When she finished, she wiped her fingers against the side of her jeans without thinking. The fabric darkened. She stared at the machine. There was a pull cord, a switch, labels that looked faded. She primed it the way the sheet instructed, counted under her breath, pulled the cord. Nothing. She pulled again, harder. The cord snapped back sharply and stung her palm. She inhaled, steadying herself, then tried once more. The generator sputtered. A weak cough. Then silence. Her heart began to race in a way that didn't feel reasonable. It was just a machine. But standing there in the growing wind, she felt small in a way she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. She pulled again. This time it caught. The sound roared to life abruptly, loud enough to startle her backward. She almost slipped, catching herself at the last second. The generator vibrated, steady and mechanical. A real sound. Not wind. Not imagination. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Inside the cabin, the single overhead light flickered on. Yellow, weak, but alive. The sight of it through the window did something strange to her throat. It wasn't comfort exactly, more like proof. She shut the generator cover carefully and went back inside, closing the door hard against the wind. The cabin felt different with the light on. Smaller, more exposed. The corners visible now. She washed her hands at the sink, wincing at the cold water. There was no hot water yet. She dried them on a thin towel that felt like sandpaper. The fire had grown stronger. The room was slowly warming. She stood in front of it, palms open toward the heat, and allowed herself a small, quiet exhale. Then she saw it, a framed photograph tucked partly behind the mantel, like someone had meant to remove it and forgotten. She hadn't noticed it earlier. She stepped closer. The frame was simple, wood scratched along the edges, the glass slightly clouded. Inside was a photo of the cabin years ago. Summer, no snow, the trees thick and green. And in front of the cabin stood 3 people, a man she didn't recognize, a woman, and a young girl. The girl was maybe 10, dark hair pulled back, knees scraped, smiling wide without self-consciousness. The woman beside her had her hand resting lightly on the girl's shoulder. Evelyn's breath caught. The woman's face was familiar. Not because she'd met her, because she'd seen it in old news clippings. in a file she wasn't supposed to open. Her mother, younger, softer, not yet tired around the eyes. The man beside them, Cal, not older but unmistakable. Same stance, same steady look. The air in the cabin shifted, though nothing had moved. Her pulse began to pound in her ears. She picked up the frame with careful fingers. Her mother had never mentioned this place, not once, and yet here she was, smiling in front of it like it had belonged to her. Evelyn swallowed hard. The file in her father's office had been labeled as a financial audit. Inside, buried deep in digital folders, had been transactions tied to shell companies, environmental cleanup contracts that were never fulfilled, land purchases disguised through intermediaries, and one name that kept repeating in small notations: Calvin Mercer. She had assumed it was coincidence. The mountain felt smaller suddenly. The cabin, less random. She set the frame back exactly where she'd found it. Her hands were shaking now for a different reason. The wind hit the cabin harder, rattling the windows. Snow began striking the glass in uneven bursts. She moved to the door and checked the latch again. Still secure. Her phone sat on the table where she'd left it. She picked it up, turned it back on despite herself. No service. She walked to the window facing the road. Nothing visible now. The storm had thickened. The path she'd walked earlier was already disappearing. She tried to slow her breathing. If her mother had been here, then this wasn't just exile. It was something else. A message. Or a threat. Her mother's death had been ruled an accident. Car malfunction. Late at night, mountain road, closed case. But the numbers in the audit didn't align with accident reports, and the timeline didn't sit right. Her mother had started asking questions months before she died. Questions about missing funds, about offshore accounts, about environmental violations buried under charitable donations. Evelyn had found emails her mother had drafted but never sent, and one short message saved in a folder labeled drafts. If something happens to me, look at the land acquisitions near the northern ridge. The numbers are wrong. Trust your instincts, not your father. She had memorized that sentence. Northern ridge. She turned slowly and looked at the back of the cabin, the ridge trail Cal's note had mentioned. Her stomach tightened. The storm intensified quickly after that, the kind of fast escalation that made it feel personal. Wind howling now, not just pushing. Snow slamming against the walls in sharp bursts. The light flickered once. She moved immediately to lower the generator output like the sheet had suggested, hands moving with more confidence now. She didn't want to overload it. The flicker stopped. The cabin creaked loudly, a long groan through the beams. She froze instinctively. It held. She sat down at the table again, but not to read. She just listened. Wind, fire, the steady hum of the generator. And beneath it all, something else. A memory. Her mother's voice in the kitchen years ago. Calm. Measured. You don't get to choose whether you're responsible, Evelyn. You only get to choose what you do with it. She had been 16. Angry about something small. Now the words felt heavier. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the wind surged again. Her mind returned to the photo. Cal had known her mother. Not casually, not distantly. He had stood beside her like they shared something unspoken. Had he known about the fraud? Had he tried to stop it? Or had he been part of it? The thought made her chest tighten again. Trust no one. That had been her father's unspoken rule, not because people were dangerous, but because information was. She stood abruptly and walked to the fireplace again, kneeling to adjust a log that had shifted. The physical act helped. The heat grounding. Outside, something cracked loudly. The tree limb, maybe. The sound echoed sharp and final. She stayed still for several seconds after, waiting. Nothing followed. She exhaled slowly. She wasn't afraid of storms. Not really. She was afraid of being cut off long enough that choices would be made for her. If her father believed distance would quiet her, he underestimated something. Or maybe he didn't. Maybe he believed she would see the mountain, feel the cold, remember comfort, and decide that silence was easier. Her gaze moved toward the ridge trail again, buried now under growing snow. Northern ridge. Her mother's words pressed against her thoughts like a bruise. The light flickered once more. This time it went out. The hum of the generator cut abruptly. Silence rushed in so quickly it felt like a vacuum. She stood there in darkness, the fire the only source of light now, shadows stretching long across the walls. Her pulse hammered. She grabbed the flashlight from the drawer and switched it on, the beam cutting a sharp white line through the room. Wind roared outside. She moved quickly toward the back door again, forcing it open against the pressure of the storm. Snow hit her face immediately, stinging. The generator had stalled. She could see the cord hanging loose. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it over the wind. She stepped into the snow, boots sinking deep this time, almost to her calf. She reached the generator and pulled the cord once. Nothing. Again. The wind shoved her sideways, almost knocking her balance off. She braced herself and pulled harder. The generator sputtered weakly, then died. Her fingers felt numb already. She pulled again, anger rising now. Not panic, not fear. Anger. She was not going to stand in this snow and freeze because she didn't understand a machine. She adjusted the choke lever the way she remembered Cal doing without thinking. Pulled again. The engine roared back to life, louder this time. She closed the cover and stumbled back toward the cabin, slamming the door behind her. The light flickered back on. She stood there breathing hard, snow melting in her hair, soaking through her sleeves. The room felt smaller now, more fragile. She walked to the table slowly and sat down. Her hands trembled, but not helplessly. There was something different in the tremor. Not weakness. Recognition. This wasn't exile. This was positioning. Her father had sent her to the one place her mother had trusted, and the one man who had known her. The storm howled louder, pressing against the walls as if trying to test what would give first. Evelyn sat very still in the yellow light, listening. She wasn't ready, but she wasn't leaving. Not yet. She didn't sleep much. The storm moved in waves through the night. Sometimes it roared so loud the cabin felt like it might lift. Other times it quieted enough that she could hear snow sliding off the roof in heavy sheets. Each time the generator dipped in pitch, her eyes opened. She lay on the narrow bed, fully dressed, boots on the floor beside her, flashlight within reach. The blanket was thin, but warm enough once the fire had settled into a steady burn. At some point near dawn, the wind dropped. Not all at once. It just thinned out, like something losing interest. She stayed still for a while after that, listening for anything out of place. Nothing came. When she finally sat up, her body felt stiff. The kind of stiffness that comes from bracing unconsciously for hours. Light crept through the small bedroom window. Pale and almost blue, she stood and walked to the main room. The fire had burned low, just embers now, glowing quietly. The generator still hummed. Steady. Reliable. She let out a slow breath she hadn't meant to hold. The cabin had held. She pushed the front door open carefully. Snow had reshaped everything. The path was gone. The woodpile was half buried. The world looked softer, almost innocent, as if the night hadn't tried to break it. The road was invisible. She stepped outside and the cold bit at her face again, sharper after the temporary warmth inside. The air smelled clean now. Still. No truck at the bottom of the road. No tire tracks. Only untouched snow stretching between the trees. For a moment she felt something close to relief. Then she noticed fresh footprints near the woodpile. Not hers. Larger. Deeper. Leading away from the cabin toward the ridge trail. Her stomach tightened. Cal. The prints were recent. Snow hadn't filled them in yet. He'd come during the storm. Why? She crouched slightly, studying the shape. His stride was even. Not rushed. He hadn't knocked. He hadn't checked on her. He'd just gone toward the ridge. Her mother's words surfaced again without invitation. Northern Ridge. The numbers are wrong. She straightened slowly. The ridge trail curved behind the cabin and climbed upward through dense trees before cresting into open rock. She looked at it for a long time. The smart decision would be to wait. To ask him, to understand before acting, but she had learned something the night before. Waiting felt too much like surrender. She went back inside and dressed properly this time. 2 sweaters layered, thick socks. The heaviest coat she brought, even if it wasn't meant for mountains. Gloves. hat. She hesitated at the door. Then she turned off the generator. The cabin fell silent again except for the faint crackle of dying embers. She latched the door behind her and stepped into the snow. The cold hit harder without the storm's motion. It was sharp and clear, settling into her lungs like glass. She followed the footprints carefully. The snow was deep but packed where he had walked. Her boots fit into the impressions awkwardly. The trail narrowed quickly. Trees crowded closer. Branches sagged under snow, forcing her to duck. The climb began gradually but steepened without warning. Her breathing turned heavier. Her legs burned faster than she expected. She wasn't weak. She worked out. She kept herself fit. But this was different. This wasn't controlled. There was no climate setting, no polished floor. Halfway up, she almost turned back. The thought came quietly. No one would know. But then she pictured the photo again, her mother standing right where she stood now, years ago, looking content in a place Evelyn had never seen. She kept going. The ridge opened suddenly after the last line of trees. Wind swept across the exposed rock, cutting sideways. Snow moved in thin sheets over the surface like drifting sand. She stopped. The view stretched outward in layers of white and gray. Valleys and distant peaks blurred together. And near the edge of the ridge stood a small structure she hadn't seen from below. Not a building, more like a storage shed. Low, weathered, partially buried in snow. Her pulse quickened. Carl stood beside it. He was bent slightly, brushing snow off the top with a shovel. His movements were methodical. He noticed her before she spoke. Of course he did. He straightened slowly and turned. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look pleased either. "You shouldn't be up here," he said, raising his voice slightly over the wind. Her breath came out in visible bursts. "You came during the storm." He held her gaze for a moment. "Yeah, why?" He rested the shovel against the side of the shed. "Because snow collapses weak roofs." "That cabin isn't weak." "No," he said, "but this is." He knocked once on the top of the small structure. The sound was hollow. She stepped closer, boots slipping slightly on the icy rock. "What is it?" she asked. He studied her face carefully, as if measuring something. "Storage." "For what?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to the small door built into the side of the shed and pulled it open. The hinges groaned. Inside were boxes. Not tools, not supplies. Metal lock boxes. Waterproof containers, stacked deliberately. Her chest tightened. "What's in them?" she asked quietly. He looked at her again. "You tell me," he said. Her throat felt dry. "I don't know what you're talking about." He gave her a long look. "You came up here the morning after the storm. You followed my tracks. That's not curiosity. That's intent." Wind whipped between them, carrying snow across the ridge. She stepped closer to the open door and crouched, brushing frost off one of the containers. There was a company logo faintly scratched into the metal. Her family's logo. Old version. Pre-rebrand. Her hands began to shake again. "How long has this been here?" she asked. "A while." "How long is a while? Since before your mother died." The words landed without force, but they knocked something loose inside her. She swallowed. She was here. Yes. How often? Enough. He didn't elaborate. The wind howled briefly, then settled. She stood slowly. "She told me to look at the land acquisitions near the northern ridge." Cal's expression didn't change. "That sounds like her." "You knew," she said. It wasn't an accusation yet, just a fact forming. He exhaled slowly, eyes moving toward the horizon for a second, before returning to her. "I knew there were contracts being buried," he said. "Clean-up jobs that never happened. Forest sections marked as restored that were still contaminated." Her stomach twisted. "And you just stored it up here?" "I stored copies." "Of what?" "Financial trails, survey reports, internal emails." Her heart pounded harder now. Why not go to the authorities? He let out a short breath that wasn't quite a laugh. "You think they don't already know?" The wind picked up again, slicing across the ridge. She felt suddenly exposed standing there, the shed door open, the boxes visible. "If you knew," she said carefully, "why didn't you tell me? You were a kid." "I'm not now." "No," he agreed. "You're not." Silence stretched between them. The mountain felt larger than before, colder. Did she plan to expose them? Evelyn asked. "Yes. And you?" "I helped." The word settled heavily. Her pulse raced faster. "And after she died?" He looked away briefly. Not evasive, just tired. "After she died," he said, "I made copies and kept them somewhere your father wouldn't think to look." Her hands clenched at her sides inside her gloves. "He sent me here," she said slowly. Cal nodded once. "I figured." "To scare me?" "Maybe. Or to show me this." He didn't answer. She stared at the boxes again. If these were real, if the documentation was solid, this wasn't just fraud. This was criminal, environmental damage, embezzlement, cover-ups. Her father hadn't just cut corners. He had built an empire on rot. The wind shifted direction suddenly, pushing against her back. She felt unsteady. "Why didn't you come forward after she died?" she asked. He held her gaze this time. "Because she was the one they would have listened to." "And me?" she asked. His eyes searched her face. "I don't know yet." The words stung more than she expected. She turned away, looking out over the valley. The mountain didn't care who she was. Cal had said that. But down there, in the cities, people did. Her name opened doors. It closed mouths. It intimidated. It also protected her father. She felt something tightening in her chest again. Not fear. Wait, if she walked back down now and pretended none of this existed, she could go back eventually. Apologize. Play compliant daughter. The exile would end. The privileges would return. If she didn't, her mind pictured boardrooms, headlines, courtrooms, her father's face, her mother's. Wind cut across her cheeks, cold enough to sting. Cal stepped back from the shed. "Storm's not done for the week," he said quietly. "Another one's coming." She didn't move. He waited. Finally, she turned back toward him. "Open one," she said. He hesitated for the first time. "You sure?" Her jaw tightened. "Yes." He stepped into the shed and lifted one of the containers carefully. Set it down on the rock between them. He unlatched it. Inside were stacks of printed documents sealed in plastic. USB drives. Handwritten notes. Her family's letterhead stared back at her from the top page. She felt her breath catch in her throat. This wasn't rumor. This wasn't suspicion. This was proof. The wind howled again, louder this time. And for the first time since arriving on the mountain, she understood why her father had sent her here. Not to break her. To test her. If she left this untouched, she chose him. If she opened it, she was choosing something else. She reached down slowly and picked up the first folder. Her gloves made the paper awkward. She pulled them off. The cold hit her fingers instantly, but she kept turning pages. The paper felt thinner than she expected. Not fragile, just ordinary. Which made it worse. There was nothing dramatic about it. No red stamps, no obvious signs of corruption. Just spreadsheets, site surveys, emails printed in clean black ink, ordinary documents describing extraordinary damage. She stood there on the ridge with the wind cutting across her bare fingers and read words she had already suspected were real. Remediation delayed pending budget adjustment. Forest integrity rating updated for reporting alignment. Contractor reassigned prior to inspection. The language was careful, soft, built to blur. But the numbers didn't blur. Funds allocated. Funds withdrawn. Funds redirected to shell subsidiaries she recognized from the audit. She flipped another page. Photos. Satellite images overlaid with green check marks labeled restored. Underneath, time-stamped field photos taken weeks later. The same land. Still scarred. Soil darkened. Water cloudy. Her pulse slowed into something colder. "How many sites?" she asked without looking up. 16 confirmed, Cal said. "Probably more." "And my mother knew about all of them." She found the first 4. We started digging after that. The wind snapped at the pages, trying to rip them free. She pressed them down. She was careful, Cal added. Too careful, maybe. Evelyn swallowed. Careful didn't save her. The words left before she could weigh them. Cal didn't respond immediately. Finally, he said, no. Silence settled again. Not empty, just full of everything neither of them were saying. She turned another page. An internal memo. Her father's name at the top. Accelerate finalization of Northern Ridge parcel before Q4 audit. Her stomach tightened. Northern Ridge parcel. She looked up slowly at the land stretching beyond them. Snow-covered now. Quiet, almost peaceful. Beneath it, chemical runoff buried under falsified reports. This land, she said. It wasn't just an acquisition. No, Cal replied. It was a buffer. For what? For whatever they didn't want traced back. Her breath came out slow. The mountain wasn't random, it was storage. Distance, elevation, isolation. Isolation. A place where contamination could sit under snow for years without questions. She closed the folder carefully and slid it back into the container. Her fingers had gone numb. Cal watched her without pushing. If you take this down, he said quietly, there's no putting it back. She met his eyes. I know. You won't get to change your mind halfway. I know. The wind lifted again, stronger now, and she felt it press against her spine like a hand urging her backward. For a brief second, she imagined walking away, letting the mountain keep its secrets, letting the boxes freeze into the ridge until weather erased them. She imagined returning home months later, thinner, polished apology, a public reconciliation. The board would welcome her back. Her father would smile for cameras. The empire would continue. She would inherit it eventually. The thought made her chest feel hollow. She looked at Cal. Did she hesitate? Evelyn asked. He didn't ask who she meant. Every day, he said, but she kept going. The wind quieted slightly as if listening. Evelyn nodded once. Help me carry them, she said. Cal didn't smile. He just bent down and lifted 2 containers at once. The walk back down the ridge was slower. The added weight changed their balance. Snow shifted underfoot unpredictably. Twice, she slipped and caught herself against a tree trunk, breath sharp in her throat. Cal stayed a few steps ahead, breaking trail. He didn't offer to carry hers. She didn't ask. By the time they reached the cabin, her shoulders ached and her hands felt like they belonged to someone else. She unlatched the door and stepped inside first. The air felt warmer than before, though the generator was still off. The fire had burned down to ash. Cal set the containers near the table and immediately moved to restart the generator without being asked. She watched him this time. The adjustments, the sequence, the small pause before pulling the cord. It started on the second try. Light filled the cabin again. He stepped back inside and shut the door firmly against the wind. Snow clung to his jacket, melted slowly onto the floor. She removed her coat and gloves and laid them carefully near the fire pit. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The boxes sat between them on the wooden floor. Heavy, real. Once this leaves here, Cal said finally, you won't control what happens next. I've never controlled it, she replied. That's not what I mean. She knew what he meant. Lawsuits, investigations, media, shareholders, criminal charges. Her father wouldn't go quietly. He would fight with everything he had. And he had a lot. She crouched and opened one of the containers again, this time pulling out a USB drive. How many copies? She asked. 3 total. 1 here. 1 with someone I trust. 1, he hesitated slightly, was with her. Her throat tightened. And that one? Missing. The words sat heavy in the room. She nodded slowly. If they killed her for this, she said, the sentence careful and controlled, then this isn't just corporate fraud. Cal's jaw tightened slightly. I don't have proof of that, but you suspect it. He didn't answer, which was answer enough. She stood and moved toward the small kitchen counter, pulling open drawers until she found a notepad and pen. Her handwriting looked steadier than she felt. She began listing names: journalists she'd met at charity galas, an environmental prosecutor she'd once spoken to at a conference, a former board member who had quietly resigned 2 years ago. Cal watched without interruption. "You're not going back," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. She paused. Images flickered uninvited: her old apartment overlooking the city, tailored suits, drivers waiting curbside, the familiar hum of elevators and polished floors, comfort, ease, protection. Her father's voice. "You don't understand what you're threatening." She looked down at the list forming under her hand. "I understand now," she said. The wind hit the cabin hard enough to rattle the windows. Cal moved toward them automatically, checking the frames. Another wave of snow struck, heavier this time. He glanced outside. "That second storm's early," he muttered. Her pulse quickened. "How bad?" He didn't soften it. "Bad enough that no one's driving up here for a few days." She absorbed that. "Good," she said. He looked at her sharply. "You want to be snowed in?" "I want time. Time to scan everything, copy it, secure it, send it in pieces so no single person held all of it. Time to decide how to position herself before the first leak hit. Time before her father realized she wasn't coming back quietly." Cal studied her face carefully. "You sure this isn't reaction?" he asked. The question wasn't condescending. It was serious. She held his gaze. "I found the audit before he sent me here," she said. "I confronted him. And he didn't deny it." Cal's eyes shifted slightly. "He just told me I didn't understand what I was threatening." The words sounded different now. Smaller. "Maybe he thought isolation would make you rethink it," Cal said. "Maybe," she replied. The wind howled louder. The light flickered once. She walked to the fireplace and began rebuilding the fire more confidently this time. Kindling first. Space for airflow. She didn't rush it. Cal watched her hands but didn't step in. When the flame caught cleanly, she felt a small, steady satisfaction. Not pride, just progress. She stood slowly. "When this comes out," she said, eyes on the fire, "it's not just his reputation." "No," Cal agreed. "It's mine too." "Yes." She nodded. Her name was on the company, on the boards, on the foundation's charitable donations, on buildings. The empire carried her bloodline. Exposing it would stain her permanently. She understood that now. The storm outside intensified rapidly, snow slamming into the cabin walls in sharp bursts. Cal moved closer to the door instinctively. "We should secure the woodpile better," he said. She nodded. They worked without speaking for the next several minutes, stacking additional logs inside, reinforcing the back door, checking the latch again. The physical motion steadied her thoughts. When they finished, they stood near the table again, the containers between them. "You trust me?" she asked suddenly. Cal didn't hesitate. "Yes." The answer landed heavier than she expected. "Why?" she pressed. He looked at the boxes, then back at her. "Because you came up the ridge." The wind roared again. She felt something settle inside her. Not certainty, but alignment. She sat down and pulled her laptop from her suitcase. No internet, no connection, but enough to begin organizing. She inserted the USB drive. Files populated the screen. Years of data. She exhaled slowly. The storm battered the cabin as night approached again. This time, she didn't lie awake, waiting for it to test the walls. She worked, and somewhere between file transfers and handwritten notes, between wind gusts and the steady hum of the generator, the exile shifted. It wasn't punishment anymore. It was preparation. Outside, snow buried the ridge deeper. Inside, the first cracks in an empire widened quietly. And she didn't look away. The second storm didn't feel like weather. It felt like interference. By morning, the windows were almost fully rimmed in white. Snow pressed against the lower panes, muting the light into something gray and dull. The generator had run through half its fuel overnight. She rationed it carefully now, turning it off when she didn't need it, letting the cabin fall back into silence between bursts of work. Cal stayed, not because she asked. He simply didn't leave when the wind made it clear that going down the ridge would be stupid. He slept on the couch without comment, boots lined up neatly beside it, coat folded once and placed within reach. They didn't talk much. They worked. She scanned documents while he sorted physical files into tighter bundles, resealing containers so moisture wouldn't ruin anything. He built the fire higher during colder hours. She kept lists, names, timelines, inconsistencies in transaction patterns. The rhythm formed without discussion. Late afternoon, while she was reviewing a set of land surveys marked cleared, she heard it. A low sound beneath the wind. Not natural. Not the groan of wood or the sweep of branches. An engine. She froze, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Cal looked up immediately. He'd heard it too. They both stayed still. The sound faded, then returned louder, closer. Her chest tightened slowly. That road's not passable, Cal said under his breath. The engine revved harder, straining. A second engine joined it. The sound carried unevenly through the storm, distorted by wind, but unmistakable. Vehicles. She closed the laptop gently, as if sudden motion might draw attention. Cal stood and moved toward the window without rushing. He didn't pull the curtain aside immediately. He listened first. The engines stopped. Silence. Then doors opening. Muffled through wind. Her pulse began to climb. How many? She asked quietly. 2, maybe 3. Could it be rescue? The question sounded thin even to her. Cal didn't answer. He moved the curtain just enough to see. She watched his face, not the window. His jaw tightened slightly. Black trucks, he said. Her stomach dropped. Corporate. Her father didn't send marked vehicles. He sent quiet ones, the kind that blended. How? She whispered. The road. They probably chained the tires, or came in before the snow thickened. A hard knock hit the front door. Not polite, not aggressive either, just decisive. Her body reacted before her mind did. Heat surged through her chest, then down her arms. Cal looked at her. What do you want to do? He asked. The question felt enormous. If she didn't answer, he would choose. She forced herself to think. If they were here to retrieve her, they would assume she was alone. If they were here for the boxes. Her gaze flicked toward the containers stacked near the wall. Too visible. Cal followed her eyes. Back room, he murmured. They moved quickly, but without panic. He carried 2 containers into the bedroom. She grabbed the remaining one and slid it under the bed frame, pushing it back until it touched the wall. The knock came again. Louder. Miss Hale, a man's voice called through the door. Calm. Controlled. We need to speak with you. Her chest tightened at the sound of her surname appear. Cal stood near the kitchen counter, eyes steady on her. She wiped her hands on her jeans unconsciously and walked to the door. Her heart hammered, but her face felt strangely still. She unlatched it and opened it halfway. 3 men stood outside, dark coats, boots heavy with snow. No visible company insignia, but she recognized the posture. Corporate security. The man in front removed his gloves slowly. Miss Hale, he said again, nodding once. Your father is concerned. The word concerned almost made her laugh. I'm fine, she said. The wind whipped around them, tugging at her hair. He glanced past her shoulder into the cabin. May we come in? No. His expression didn't shift. This storm isn't safe. We were sent to escort you back. I didn't request an escort. You don't need to. The calmness in his tone was practiced. She held the door firm. I'm staying. A brief silence passed between them. Snow struck the side of the cabin in sharp bursts. The man's eyes moved over her face, assessing. We're you accessed internal company files prior to your departure, he said evenly. Your father would like to clarify misunderstandings. Her pulse pounded in her ears. I don't have misunderstandings, she replied. His gaze sharpened slightly. We can do this the easy way, he said quietly, or the inconvenient way. Cal shifted behind her, just enough to be visible over her shoulder. The man's eyes flicked to him. "And you are?" he asked. "Maintenance," Cal replied flatly. The man studied him for a beat longer than necessary. "Miss Hale," he continued, redirecting to her, "this environment is unstable. We advise immediate departure." The wind howled louder, almost on cue. She felt the weight of the mountain behind her. The ridge. The boxes hidden under the bed. If she stepped outside now, they would take her phone, her laptop, possibly search the cabin. If she refused. The man shifted his stance slightly. "We're prepared to wait," he added. Her throat tightened. Wait. Until the storm passed. Until she was exhausted. Until pressure broke something. She felt anger rise, not loud, not explosive, just steady and cold. "You drove up here in this weather," she said. "That was reckless. We're trained for it." "Good," she replied. "Then you're trained to drive back down." His jaw tightened slightly. "Your father won't appreciate this," he said. The statement carried no emotion. She held his gaze. "That's the point." For a second, something flickered in his eyes. Not fear. Not respect. Calculation. He stepped back slightly. "We'll remain nearby," he said. "If you reconsider." Nearby. Her pulse spiked. The trucks weren't leaving. They were establishing presence. He replaced his gloves and nodded once. "Stay warm, Miss Hale." Then he turned. The three men moved back toward the road, boots crunching heavily in the snow. She closed the door slowly and latched it again. The cabin felt smaller immediately. Cal walked to the window and checked the angle. "They parked lower," he said, "probably out of sight. So they can watch." "Yes." Her breathing felt shallow. "They won't force entry," Cal added. "Not unless they have cause. They think I'll come down. Or that I'll convince you to." She looked at him sharply. "You still assume I'm influence." The thought unsettled her more than she expected. She walked to the table and sat down. "They know I accessed files," she said quietly. "They don't know what you have." Her gaze moved toward the bedroom door. "They will if they search." Cal nodded once. "Then we don't give them that chance." The wind slammed into the cabin again, rattling the windows violently. The generator flickered. She stood quickly and lowered output again, conserving fuel. "They'll wait until fuel runs low," Cal said. "Assume you can't maintain power." She felt the truth of it settle. This wasn't confrontation. It was siege. Her father didn't need to shout. He applied pressure. Let time do the work. She walked back to the bedroom and knelt, pulling the container slightly forward just enough to touch it. Cold metal under her palm. Proof. If she handed it over, the siege would end. If she didn't, the trucks would stay. The storm would worsen. Supplies would thin. Her name would begin to move quietly through corporate channels as unstable. She closed her eyes briefly. Her mother standing in that photo. Cal on the ridge beside her. Northern Ridge parcel. The numbers are wrong. She stood up slowly and returned to the main room. "We move it tonight," she said. Cal looked at her. "In this?" "Yes." "Where?" She met his eyes steadily. "You said there was another copy." He hesitated only briefly. "Yes." "With someone you trust?" "Yes." "Then we make it two." The wind howled again, loud enough to shake the cabin. Cal studied her face carefully. "This won't stay quiet after that," he said. "It was never going to." Outside, through the blurred glass, she saw faint movement lower down the road. A door opening, one of the men stepping out briefly, scanning upward toward the cabin, watching. She felt something settle inside her. Not calm. Resolve. "They came because they're afraid," she said quietly. Cal didn't argue. The storm intensified again, snow swirling in violent spirals across the windows. Inside the cabin, the fire burned steady, and the siege had begun. They waited until full dark, not because it was dramatic, because it was practical. Wind hid movement. Snow erased tracks faster at night, and the men below would be cold, tired, less sharp. The generator had been shut off an hour earlier. The cabin sat in firelight only now. Shadows moved along the walls in uneven patterns. Every small sound felt amplified. Evelyn stood near the window, watching for shapes through the blur of snow. 2 trucks remained. She could just make out the faint outline of one when the wind shifted. No headlights. No interior lights. Patient. Cal moved quietly in the bedroom, sealing the containers inside waterproof tarps. He worked without wasted motion. She turned when he stepped back into the main room. "You don't have to come," she said. He didn't respond immediately. He set one container near the door, then another. "I was part of this before you knew about it," he said finally. "I'm not stopping now." The fire snapped softly behind them. She nodded once. They dressed in silence. Extra layers, gloves, hats pulled low, flashlights wrapped in cloth to dull the beam. Her hands felt steady now, not numb. Steady. They extinguished the fire completely before leaving. Let the cabin fall into full darkness. When she opened the back door, wind punched into the room hard enough to steal her breath. Snow hit her face like thrown gravel. Cal stepped out first, shouldering one container. She followed with the second, muscles straining immediately against the weight. The night swallowed them quickly. There was no moon, only the faintest gray wash behind thick cloud. They moved toward the ridge trail again, not the road, away from the trucks. Each step sank deep. Snow had risen to mid-calf in places. The container dragged against her thigh, awkward and heavy. Halfway to the trees, she heard a sound behind them. A door closing. Her heart lurched. She didn't turn immediately. Cal stopped and angled his head slightly, listening. Wind howled, masking details. Then faint crunching. Boots in snow. Lower down. "They're checking perimeter," Cal murmured. Her pulse thudded hard against her ribs. "Keep moving," he added quietly. They reached the tree line and disappeared into shadow. Branches caught at her coat. Snow dropped down her collar. The climb felt steeper this time under the added weight. Her breathing grew ragged fast. She forced herself to slow it. Control. Panic wasted oxygen. Behind them, a beam of light swept briefly across the lower slope. Flashlight. Searching, her stomach tightened. "They'll assume you're inside until they check," Cal said quietly. "And when they do, they'll see the door latched. And footprints." He didn't answer. Snow would cover some, not all. The ridge felt farther tonight. Every step burned her legs. The container grew heavier with each shift in terrain. Twice she stumbled. Once she nearly dropped it entirely, catching the edge before it slammed into the snow. Cal didn't scold. He just adjusted his pace to match hers. Halfway up, wind intensified sharply, nearly knocking her sideways. She dropped to one knee instinctively, gripping the container to keep it from sliding down the slope. Her heart pounded violently. "Up," Cal urged softly. She pushed herself upright again. They reached the shed at the ridge and moved past it this time, further, across exposed rock where snow thinned in patches. The wind screamed here, unobstructed. She could barely hear her own breathing. Cal led her toward a narrow outcropping she hadn't noticed before, a split in the rock face partially concealed by drifted snow. He set his container down and brushed snow aside quickly. A metal hatch revealed itself beneath. Her pulse spiked. "You built this," she shouted over the wind. "Years ago," he replied. He pulled the hatch open. A small cavity beneath, lined in plastic. Dry. He lowered his container inside carefully. She knelt and did the same with hers, hands shaking now from cold more than nerves. When both were secured, Cal closed the hatch and packed snow back over it deliberately. From 10 feet away, it would look untouched. She sat back on her heels for a moment, breath coming hard. The wind roared around them. "Is that the other copy?" she asked. "No," he said. "This is insurance." Her stomach tightened. "How many insurances do you have?" "Enough." She nodded slowly. A light flared suddenly below. Bright. Sweeping upward across the slope, she froze. "They're coming up," she whispered. Cal grabbed her arm and pulled her lower against the rock. They flattened themselves against the ridge, bodies pressed into the frozen surface. The beam moved slowly across the trees below, methodical, not rushed. Her heart hammered so loud she was certain it carried in the wind. The light moved higher, closer. Another beam joined it, two men climbing. Her mouth went dry. "They won't expect you up here in this," Cal murmured, barely audibly. The light paused near the shed, swept across it. Her pulse spiked violently. If they opened it. The beam lingered for a few long seconds, then shifted away. One of the men shouted something, words lost to wind. The beams angled back down the slope. Retreating, her lungs burned from holding breath she didn't realize she'd trapped. She stayed still until the lights fully disappeared. Only when darkness reclaimed the ridge did she allow herself to move. Her hands trembled hard now. Not delicate shaking, full tremor. Cal didn't comment. He just stood slowly and extended a hand to help her up. She took it. His grip was solid, grounded. They waited another minute before descending. The climb down felt faster, though no less dangerous. Snow slid unpredictably beneath their boots. Once she nearly lost balance entirely, catching herself against Cal's shoulder. By the time they reached the tree line, her thighs burned and her fingers felt stiff inside her gloves. They approached the cabin from the back again. No lights inside, no obvious movement below. She listened carefully before opening the door. Nothing. Inside, the air felt colder than before. The fire pit sat dark, ash cold. She closed and latched the door quietly. They didn't turn on the generator. They didn't light the fire immediately. They stood in darkness, listening. Minutes passed. Then, a knock. Harder this time. She flinched. The knock came again. "Miss Hale," the same calm voice called. "We know you're inside." Her pulse climbed again, but something inside her had shifted. She moved toward the door without looking at Cal. "Your vehicle tracks suggest activity," the man continued through the wood. "We need to ensure your safety." Vehicle tracks. They hadn't used one. Bluff. She opened the door halfway again. The man stood there, snow clinging to his coat, expression unchanged. "You left," he said evenly. "For air," she replied. "In a storm. I needed air." His eyes scanned past her again. The cabin was dark. Cold. "Generator failed?" he asked. "Yes." He studied her face carefully. "You look tired." "I am." A long pause. "If you require assistance," he said, "we can escort you now." Her heartbeat steadied strangely. "No," she said. Another pause. Snow swirled between them. His gaze sharpened slightly. "Very well," he said. "We'll remain until conditions improve." She nodded once and closed the door. Latched it. Her hands were no longer shaking. Cal lit the fire slowly this time, careful not to let the light flare too high. "They'll search again at first light," he said quietly. "I know. And when they find nothing, they'll escalate." He nodded. She sat down at the table and stared at the dark laptop screen. The boxes were gone. Hidden deeper now, not inside these walls. She felt something strange settle in her chest. Not fear. Not relief. Clarity. Her father hadn't sent them to retrieve her. He'd sent them to measure her, to see if she would hand everything back when pressure mounted. She didn't. Outside, the storm raged harder. Inside, the fire rebuilt slowly. And somewhere beneath the ridge, the proof waited buried, silent, no longer within easy reach of anyone. Not even her. She exhaled slowly. The siege had shifted. And so had she. The third morning came without drama. No pounding wind. No shouted voices outside. Just a quiet so complete it felt staged. Evelyn woke before the light changed. She lay still on the narrow bed listening. Nothing. No engines idling. No boots in snow. The silence made her uneasy. She sat up slowly and pulled on her coat before stepping into the main room. Cal was already awake, sitting at the table, not drinking anything, just listening, the way he had the first day she met him. "They're gone," he said. She hadn't asked. She moved to the window and cleared a small circle in the frost with her palm. The road below was empty. No trucks. No movement. Only deep tire ruts half filled with snow, already softening at the edges. Her chest tightened, not with relief, with calculation. They didn't get what they came for, she said. No. They'll change approach. Yes. He didn't say how. He didn't need to. Pressure didn't always come in trucks. Sometimes it came in phone calls, headlines, legal letters delivered quietly. She turned away from the window and lit the generator again. The hum felt louder this morning. While the laptop booted up, she watched the signal bars. One flickered weakly, then vanished, then returned. Storm clearing. She felt her pulse shift. Time was narrowing. She plugged in one of the USB drives and began compressing files into separate encrypted folders. Smaller packets, harder to intercept all at once. Cal stood and added wood to the fire. "You leaving today?" he asked. She paused. "Yes." He nodded once. No argument. The choice had been forming since the trucks arrived. If she stayed longer, she risked being isolated again without control. If she left now, she could move first. She drafted 3 emails, not long, not dramatic. One to the environmental prosecutor she'd met 2 years ago. One to a journalist known for publishing slowly, carefully. One to a former board member who had resigned without explanation. She attached nothing yet. Just a single line, "I have documentation you need to see. It concerns Northern Ridge acquisitions and falsified remediation reports. I'm prepared to provide full evidence." Her hands hovered over the keyboard. Once sent, there would be no soft return. She pressed send. The signal bar flickered, stalled, then confirmed. Sent. Her heart did not race the way she expected. It settled. Cal watched her quietly. "That's it," she said. "For now," he replied. She stood and walked to the bedroom, pulling the remaining laptop charger and essentials into her bag. She left most of the clothes. The expensive ones felt irrelevant now. When she stepped back into the main room, she looked around slowly. The cabin felt different. Not exile. Not punishment. It had become something else entirely. Preparation ground. "You staying?" she asked Cal. "For a while," he said. She nodded. "You'll hear about it soon." "I know." She hesitated near the door. "There's still one copy missing," she said. He met her eyes. "I haven't forgotten." Neither had she. Her mother's copy. Gone. Possibly taken. Possibly destroyed. Or hidden somewhere neither of them had found yet. She opened the front door. The cold felt lighter without storm behind it. She stepped outside carefully. The road would be slow going, but manageable now. Cal walked with her as far as the base of the ridge. Neither spoke much. Halfway down, she stopped. "If this goes wrong," she said quietly, not looking at him, "they'll come after you." "They already did, once," he replied. Her chest tightened slightly. "I'm not asking you to carry this." "You're not," he said. "I chose it." She nodded once. That was enough. At the road, she paused again. The tire ruts left by the trucks had hardened into ridges. She stepped into them and began walking downhill. After a few steps, she turned back. Cal stood where she'd left him, not waving, just watching to make sure she didn't fall. Then she faced forward and kept walking. The first call came before she reached the main highway. Her phone buzzed sharply in her pocket. She didn't look at the screen immediately. When she did, the name didn't surprise her. "Father." She let it ring twice before answering. "Yes." Silence on the other end for a second. Then his voice. Measured. Calm. "You've made contact," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." A pause. "You're escalating something you don't fully understand." "I understand enough. You've seen fragments. I've seen signatures." His breathing shifted slightly. "You think this ends with you as some kind of hero?" The word carried faint disdain. "I'm not trying to be anything," she said quietly. "You are my daughter, and you're responsible." Silence again. Longer this time. Return home, he said finally. We'll manage this internally. Internally is the problem. His voice sharpened slightly. You are jeopardizing thousands of employees. No, she replied. You did. The wind moved softly across the road around her. You will regret this, he said. Maybe. And when the board removes you, that's their right. His breathing grew tighter. You think they'll protect you? I'm not asking them to. Silence again. He changed tone then, softer. You're tired, he said. You've been isolated. That man up there has filled your head. Her jaw tightened. He didn't need to. Another pause. Then, quietly, you're choosing him over your family. The statement almost made her stop walking. I'm choosing what's true, she said. He didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice had cooled again. This won't unfold the way you think. The line went dead. She stood still on the road for several seconds after the call ended. The mountain air felt thinner now. She slid the phone back into her pocket and kept walking. By the time she reached the city that evening, the first article was already live. It wasn't explosive. Not yet. Careful headline. Whistleblower raises questions about Hale Industries' environmental practices. No accusations, just questions. Her name appeared in the third paragraph. Daughter of CEO. Internal concerns. Preliminary documentation under review. She read it once in the back seat of a borrowed car and then set the phone down. Her chest felt tight, but not unstable. This was movement, not spectacle. Her apartment building loomed ahead. Polished glass. Doorman at the entrance. He recognized her immediately. His expression flickered briefly in certainty. Welcome back, Miss Hale, he said carefully. She nodded once and stepped inside. The lobby felt too warm, too controlled. As the elevator doors closed, she saw her reflection in the mirrored wall. Hair pulled back loosely, coat still dusted faintly with mountain snow. She looked different. Not visibly. But something had shifted behind her eyes. When she stepped into her apartment, the silence felt artificial. No wind, no creaking beams, just controlled temperature and city hum beyond the glass. She walked to the window overlooking the skyline. Lights stretched endlessly, orderly, powerful. Her phone buzzed again, multiple notifications now. Board meetings scheduled, press inquiries, unknown numbers calling. The siege had changed to rain. She placed her bag on the floor and sat on the couch without turning on any lights. The city glowed around her. The mountain felt far away already. But the weight she carried hadn't lessened. It had only changed shape, and she knew this was only the beginning. By the end of the week, it wasn't quiet anymore. The second article carried more detail. The third named sites. The fourth included leaked internal emails that hadn't come from her. That unsettled her. Someone else was moving. She stood in her apartment kitchen early one morning, staring at the screen while coffee went cold beside her. The city below moved as it always did. Buses sighing at corners, people crossing streets with heads down, but the company's stock had dropped 6 points before opening. Her phone hadn't stopped vibrating since the first email went out. Board members requesting emergency meetings, lawyers advising restraint, public relations teams drafting statements she never approved. Her father had not called again. That silence felt more deliberate than anger. She dressed carefully for the board meeting. Not in black, not in defiance, just neutral, controlled. When she entered the conference room that afternoon, conversations thinned immediately. Some faces looked tight with worry, some openly irritated, a few curious. Her father stood near the far window, hands clasped behind his back. He didn't turn right away. The chair at the head of the table remained his. She took a seat halfway down instead, no dramatic positioning. The board chair cleared his throat. Evelyn, he began. Voice strained but measured. You've placed the company in a precarious position. She met his gaze. The company placed itself there. A few board members shifted uncomfortably. Her father finally turned. He looked composed. Impeccable suit. Calm expression. If she hadn't known better, she might have believed he was untouched by any of it. These accusations are incomplete, he said evenly. Context is being ignored. Then provide it, she replied. His eyes flickered just slightly. There are proprietary considerations, he said. Environmental compliance isn't proprietary. A silence fell. One board member leaned forward. Evelyn, are you prepared to substantiate what's been released? Yes. Her voice didn't waver. With what? He pressed. Full audit trails, site photography, internal memos, murmurs. Her father's jaw tightened. You removed confidential material without authorization, he said. I preserved evidence, she replied. The word evidence changed the room. Her father's gaze sharpened. You are exposing the company to regulatory seizure. It's already exposed. The board chair interjected carefully. Perhaps we should adjourn privately. No, Evelyn said before she could second-guess it. All eyes shifted to her. This doesn't stay private anymore. Her father stepped closer to the table. You are not prepared for what follows, he said quietly. She held his gaze. Neither are you. The meeting fractured after that. Lawyers called recess. Several board members left early. Two approached her privately, one offering quiet support, the other warning her that reputational damage would be permanent. She accepted both reactions without argument. When she exited the building, reporters were already gathering. Cameras, microphones, questions overlapping. Miss Hale, are you alleging criminal misconduct? Did your father authorize falsified reports? Are you resigning? She paused at the top of the steps. The noise pressed in. For a moment, she felt the mountain wind in her memory sharp, clarifying. She didn't shout. She didn't posture. I'm cooperating with investigators, she said evenly. The documentation will speak for itself. Is your father involved? Someone shouted. She held still. My focus is remediation and accountability. It wasn't an answer. It wasn't denial either. She stepped into the waiting car without looking back. The legal process moved faster than she expected. Regulatory agencies requested formal interviews. Federal investigators opened preliminary review. Internal whistleblower protections were extended to her, officially an irony she almost smiled at. Her father's legal team responded aggressively. Motions filed. Attempts to frame the documents as misinterpreted drafts. She didn't sleep much that week. Not from fear. From volume. Calls, meetings, statements, evidence transfers, and beneath it all, something quieter. Grief. It came unexpectedly. Not loud. Just a steady undercurrent. One night, after reviewing deposition notes for hours, she found herself staring at the old photo she had taken from the cabin. She'd slipped it into her bag without thinking. Her mother's hand rested lightly on young Evelyn's shoulder in the image. Casual, protective. She traced the outline with her thumb. You were braver than I understood, she murmured, not expecting an answer. Her phone buzzed again. A text from Cal. Second site confirmed contaminated. Prosecutor called me. She exhaled slowly. Movement. Real movement. She typed back, they'll try to discredit you. The response came minutes later. Let them. She stared at the two words. Simple. Solid. The next morning, the stock dropped another 11 points. Shareholders began demanding emergency restructuring. Two executives resigned quietly. The board convened again, this time without her father present at first. When he entered, the shift in the room was palpable, not dramatic, just altered. Control was no longer absolute. The chair spoke carefully. We need transitional leadership while investigations proceed. Her father's eyes flicked toward her, then back to the board. You're reacting to headlines, he said. We're reacting to exposure, the chair replied. A vote was called. Interim removal. Pending investigation. Her father stood very still as hands were raised. When the majority tipped against him, he didn't argue. He looked at her once. Not with rage. With something harder to name. Disappointment, maybe. Or calculation for the next move. After the meeting, he approached her privately in the hallway. You think this is over? He said quietly. No, she replied. You've weakened everything we built. You weakened it, she said. I just stopped hiding it. He studied her face. You don't understand what it takes to build at scale, he said. And you don't understand what it costs, she replied. Silence. He stepped past her without another word. She watched him walk away down the corridor that had once felt permanent. The investigation expanded. Charges were filed, not all directly against him at first, some against executives, some against shell entities. But the structure began to fracture. Assets frozen, contracts suspended, public statements issued promising full environmental remediation. She insisted on funding the cleanup before any corporate restructuring. That decision cost her. Board members questioned the financial impact. She didn't shift. If we repair, she said in one meeting, we repair first. It wasn't about optics. It was about balance. The first time she visited one of the contaminated sites in person, months later, the air smelled faintly metallic even from a distance. Workers in protective gear moved carefully through cordoned sections. Soil samples, water testing, real remediation, not paperwork. She stood at the edge of the site quietly, boots in mud this time instead of snow. Cal approached from the other side of the perimeter fence. He didn't comment on the cameras present. He just nodded once. It's starting, he said. Yes. They stood side by side for a moment without speaking. Reporters shouted questions from a distance. She ignored them. You okay? He asked after a while. She considered the question, not emotionally, practically. I'm not who I was, she said finally. He nodded. That's usually how it works. She looked at the land being turned, cleaned, restored slowly. It's not about dismantling, she said quietly. It's about rebuilding. He glanced at her. You ready for that part? She didn't answer immediately, but she didn't look away either. The empire her father built was fracturing publicly now. Not collapsing in spectacle, just eroding under truth. And she felt the weight of what came next settling onto her shoulders. Not inheritance, responsibility. Different, heavier, but cleaner. The first morning she showed up in work boots. No one recognized her, not because she looked different, because she didn't arrive in a car with tinted windows. She parked 2 blocks away from the site trailer and walked the rest. The ground was uneven, churned mud mixed with gravel. The air still carried that faint chemical edge, though it was weaker now. Workers were already there, trucks idling, equipment humming low. A few heads turned as she approached, then turned away again. One of the foremen stepped down from the trailer steps, clipboard in hand. You're early, he said without looking up. I'm not observing today, she replied. That made him look. Recognition came slowly. His expression shifted, not hostile, just uncertain. You don't have to, he began. I know, she said. She picked up a spare hard hat from the rack near the trailer door and fitted it over her hair. Where do you need hands? The question hung in the air longer than it should have. People weren't used to being asked that by her. The foreman studied her boots, her gloves, the way she stood, not defensive, not stiff. Finally, he nodded toward a section near the tree line. Soil removal. It's not clean work. I didn't come for clean. He didn't smile. But he didn't argue either. The first hour was humbling. The mud sucked at her boots with each step. The shovel felt heavier than it had any right to. The protective mask made breathing warm and tight. No cameras here. No microphones. Just repetitive motion. Dig. Lift. Shift. Her shoulders burned quickly. Her lower back protested. Sweat gathered under the hard hat despite the cool air. No one made a show of helping her. No one mocked her either. They just worked. By midday, her gloves were coated. Her forearms trembled when she paused. She leaned the shovel against a pile and stepped back briefly, catching her breath. Cal approached from the adjacent section, wiping his hands on his jeans. You don't have to prove anything, he said quietly. She shook her head slightly. I'm not proving, she replied. He studied her for a second. You're not punishing yourself either. No, that was true. This wasn't penance. It was alignment. The remediation process would take years, Millions redirected from profit margins into cleanup and restoration. Shareholders grumbled. Analysts speculated. She stepped down from executive leadership voluntarily once transitional governance stabilized. Publicly, it was framed as focus on oversight. Privately, she knew she couldn't rebuild and command from the same chair her father had used to hide. The company's name changed 6 months later. Not rebranded, rebuilt. New charter, environmental oversight written into the core structure, not the margins. Some investors left, others stayed. The empire shrank. It became something smaller, less impressive, more honest. One evening, long after the press had moved on to fresher scandals, she returned to the mountain. Not in secret, just quietly. The road had been cleared, the cabin repaired where storm damage had warped the outer beams. Cal was outside stacking wood when she stepped from the car. He didn't look surprised. "You're late," he said mildly. "I know." She walked toward him slowly. The air felt different now. Not threatening, not isolating. Familiar. They stood near the woodpile without speaking for a while. "How bad was it?" he asked eventually. She considered the question. "Worse than we thought," she said, "but survivable." He nodded once. "And him?" She looked out toward the ridge. Her father had stepped down permanently after charges formalized. Negotiated settlements. Avoided prison through agreements and cooperation. Reputation fractured. Influence diminished. "He's smaller now," she said. Cal didn't ask what that meant. They walked toward the ridge together as dusk settled in. The hatch remained undisturbed beneath packed snow and rock. She knelt and brushed away the covering. When they opened it, the containers sat exactly as they had left them, untouched. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "You could have left it buried," Cal said. "I know." She lifted one container carefully. "We won't need these much longer." "You sure?" She nodded. "Transparency works better in daylight." He watched her for a moment. "You're different," he said. She smiled faintly. "Good or bad?" "Steadier." She absorbed that quietly. They carried the containers back down together. Not hurried. Not tense. The mountain wind moved gently around them. Inside the cabin, she rebuilt the fire without hesitation now. The movements natural. The flame caught clean and strong. She stood and looked around the room. It no longer felt like exile. It felt like origin. Cal leaned against the counter, watching the fire settle. "You staying long?" he asked. She hesitated. "Long enough," she said. There was work left here, too. Restoration on land beyond the initial 16 sites. Community projects funded quietly without branding. Systems rewritten from inside out. It wasn't dramatic. It was slow. Sometimes frustrating, often unrecognized. But it held. Later that night, sitting at the small wooden table with only firelight in the room, she thought about the version of herself who had arrived months ago in polished boots and resentment. That woman had been certain she was fighting something external. An empire. A father. Corruption. She understood now it had started earlier. The first real conflict hadn't been with trucks at the bottom of the road. It had been with silence. The instinct to look away when comfort depended on it. She hadn't known how heavy that instinct was until she put it down. The mountain hadn't broken her. It had removed noise. When the fire burned low and the cabin settled into quiet, she stepped outside alone. The sky was clear tonight. Stars sharp overhead, no trucks, no storm. Just cold air and distance. She stood there for a long time, not thinking about headlines, not thinking about boardrooms, just breathing. She had dismantled something vast, but that wasn't what stayed with her. What stayed was the smaller shift, the understanding that integrity didn't feel triumphant. It felt quieter than that, harder, but cleaner. Behind her, the cabin door remained unlatched. She didn't feel the need to secure it immediately. For the first time in a long while, nothing was waiting in the dark. And she no longer was either.